She gave him everything: her trust, her money, her name. But when he vanished with it all, she didn't fall apart. She fought back. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a jaw-dropping journey of revenge, justice, and rebirth. You won't believe how it ends. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, I'd love to know. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that might just change how you see everything. I was staring out the window of my hotel room in Dubai when the phone rang. The skyline shimmered in the early evening haze-golden towers rising from the sand like a mirage. I'd just closed the biggest deal of my career. But when I saw Thomas's name flash across my screen, something shifted in my gut. We hadn't spoken since I landed. No good luck message, no how'd it go, just silence. "Evelyn," he said, the moment I answered. No warmth, no pause. "I'm leaving you. I sold the house. Lauren and I are getting married next month. Don't come back expecting anything." Then he hung up. It took me 5 minutes just to breathe again. The air in the room felt thinner than it had a moment before. I stood there, phone still in hand, as if I were waiting for the rest of the call, waiting for a punchline, an apology, a cruel joke gone too far. But there was nothing, just silence and the heavy hum of the city outside the glass. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of believing we were partners, building something real. I had built my career brick by brick, working late nights while he dabbled in real estate and startup ideas. I carried the weight of our finances, our future, our dreams. Or so I thought. Apparently, while I was closing deals in boardrooms and giving my heart to our marriage, Thomas had been drawing up exit plans with another woman. I sat on the edge of the bed, stunned. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was surgical, methodical, and utterly final. I opened my messages. 3 texts from my sister June. 2 from Melissa, my best friend. Nothing from Thomas, not a single follow-up. No explanation, no justification. Not even the decency to say goodbye properly. My hands trembled as I pulled out my laptop. I didn't cry. Not then. I had learned over the years that grief could come later. Right now, I needed information. I logged into our bank account, or rather I tried to. The password had been changed. Panic rose in my throat like bile. I reset the login, navigated the security questions, and finally, access opened. The balance dropped my stomach into the floor. He'd drained it. Every account with both our names on it gone. Savings, checking, investments. Left just enough to avoid suspicion from fraud alerts, but not a cent more. I felt cold. Cold in a city that was 104 degrees outside. Then I checked the property records. The house. The one I'd picked out after my 3rd promotion. The one with the creaky floorboards I'd fallen in love with. The one we planned to raise kids in, though we never did. Sold 3 days ago. The paperwork filed, deed transferred, and done. I read the name of the buyer twice. It wasn't Lauren's name, not directly, but something about it made my brain itch. I closed the laptop and stood up, walking to the window. Dubai glittered like a jewel box beneath me, but I no longer felt part of it. My life, our life, was being stripped away, brick by brick, and I hadn't even left the hotel yet. The phone buzzed again. A text from June. "Call me when you get this. Something's not right." Sisters always knew. I didn't call, not yet. My mind was racing too fast, circling questions without answers. How long had he planned this? Who was Lauren? How could he sell a house without my signature? Then I remembered something from 2 months ago to me to take the Dubai deal. "You deserve it," he'd said. "Take the trip. Close the contract. I'll take care of things here." He'd wanted me gone. And I had gone, like a fool, believing we were a team. I pulled my suitcase out of the closet and began to pack, not because I was going anywhere yet, but because I needed to do something. Anything. My body needed to move, needed to believe I still had control of something. My hand caught the glint of my wedding ring under the warm light. I stared at it for a moment. 8 years of promises. Of dinners and shared bills and holidays and Sunday mornings in bed. I slipped the ring off. It felt like shedding a layer of skin. And yet, as I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a broken woman. I saw Evelyn Grant, the woman who'd climbed through 3 corporate restructures, who'd negotiated a $1 million campaign while managing a team of 12. The woman who once slept under her desk to meet a deadline. The woman Thomas thought would crumble. I opened a blank document on my laptop and began to type. Timeline, counts, assets, questions, gaps, names. It wasn't grief I was feeling, it was clarity. If Thomas wanted war, he'd chosen the wrong general to betray. He had no idea what I was capable of. My phone buzzed again. Melissa this time. June's freaking out. Call us. I wasn't ready to speak, not until I had more than just shock to share. But I texted back, I'm okay, coming home tomorrow. And I'm bringing hell with me. That night, I didn't sleep. I called a lawyer in Chicago at 3 a.m., Dubai time. Cassandra Hall, high profile, ironclad. She didn't ask unnecessary questions, just told me to send what I had. Let's get to work, she said. By morning, I had a digital folder organized with documents, screenshots, and preliminary findings. The house wasn't the only asset he'd tampered with. There were withdrawal slips from our brokerage accounts, loans I hadn't approved. And someone had requested a credit line increase in my name. When I stepped onto the plane that evening, my nails were chipped and my hair was still in the bun I'd tied up before the meeting 2 days ago. But I didn't care. I wasn't flying back to Chicago as a scorned wife. I was flying home as a storm. And Thomas was standing exactly where he needed to beat the center of the strike zone. The wheels of the plane touched down at O'Hare with a soft jolt. But I didn't exhale until we were at the gate, and I felt the weight of Chicago press against the windows. It wasn't comfort, exactly more like confrontation. Home didn't feel like home anymore. Not when I knew it had been gutted behind my back, sold, stripped, erased. June met me at baggage claim, standing with her arms crossed and fury bottled up behind her tight smile. You look like hell, she said, pulling me into a hug anyway. Feel like it, I whispered. She didn't ask questions right away. She just took my suitcase, guided me through the terminal, and drove in silence. Chicago was still itself gray and alive and rude. It looked different through the lens of betrayal. Every intersection, every block near our old house now carried a haunting echo. Like I was passing through the skeleton of a life I no longer owned. I went by the house yesterday, June finally said as we neared her apartment. There was a moving truck. A blonde woman directing the movers like she ran the place. Lauren. I didn't answer. The truth sat like lead in my mouth. I had theories. Cassandra and I had exchanged enough emails to know this wasn't just a man running off with a mistress. This was a dismantling. And he'd planned it carefully like a blueprint for my erasure. Inside June's apartment, I laid everything out on her dining table. My laptop, folders, screenshots, spreadsheets. I hadn't rested in over 20 hours, but I couldn't stop. I opened the account records. He emptied our savings. All of it. Over $180,000 between savings and checking. Gone. June blinked. That's theft. Not if both names are on the account, I muttered. Legally, he didn't need my permission. But morally, she snapped. He should be in prison. I'm working on it. I flipped to the house records. June leaned over the screen. So either he sold it for way under value, or he took out a second mortgage without telling me. My voice was flat, but inside, I was burning. She stared at me. He forged your signature. He must have. I scrolled down to the deed transfer. There it was. My name, my signature, only. It wasn't mine. Not in ink. Not in intent. June's fists clenched. That bastard didn't just cheat on you. He robbed you. He did worse, I thought. He made me feel like none of it ever belonged to me in the first place. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop calling Thomas. A Taz. He's moved on. So should you. I showed it to June. Her eyes narrowed. Lauren, probably. She's got nerve, she muttered, snatching the phone from my hand. I'm about to destroy her on social media. I pulled the phone back. No, not yet. This isn't a petty catfight. This is a criminal operation. I opened my laptop again and searched for her. It didn't take long. Lauren Bennett, 29, real estate agent. Blonde, thin, and polished in that curated social media way that looks effortless but takes hours. In her profile photos, she wore the silver necklace I gave Thomas for our 7th anniversary. She's wearing my jewelry, I said quietly. She's also wearing your husband, June muttered. It should have made me laugh. Instead, I felt nothing. Just cold, analytical. I clicked through Lauren's posts, watching her smile in picture after picture with Thomas dates dinners, weekends in Wisconsin. They'd been flaunting their relationship for months, and me. I'd been burning the candle at both ends, thinking I was investing in our future. Turns out I was just paying for theirs. Then June pointed at the screen. Look, this post was from last week. Lauren stood in front of a house. Another successful sale. Sometimes the best deals come from people who need to move fast. Hashtag quick sale. Hashtag new beginnings, our house. She sold our house. She probably convinced Thomas to list it below market so she could close fast, split the commission, and pocket the proceeds. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was strategic. My phone rang Cassandra. I've reviewed everything you sent, she said. This is what it looks like. We're looking at a case of fraud, forgery, and financial abuse. I need you in my office first thing tomorrow. How long will this take? Depends on how much evidence we can gather, and how dirty he's willing to play. Then I'll give you everything. After I hung up, I stared at the table covered in papers. Every number was a bruise. Every date a lie. The late-night business trips. The sudden interest in managing the bills. His push for me to take the Dubai deal. It had all been part of the plan. I was disposable, convenient, a stepping stone. June broke the silence. What are you thinking? That he made a mistake, I said. He thought I'd be too heartbroken to fight. But he forgot who I am. She smiled. So, what's the plan? We gather everything. Every message, every dollar, every document. My voice was calm. Controlled. We find out how far this goes. We don't just burn him, we salt the earth. That night, I barely slept. I kept seeing Thomas's face, confident, cruel, dismissive. He didn't expect me to rise. He expected silence. But silence was never my language. He wanted to disappear me. I was going to make sure the world remembered him. Not as a man, not as a husband, but as a liar, a fraud, and a felon. The next morning was bitterly cold. Chicago had that kind of wind that cuts through wool like it's nothing. A reminder that the city doesn't care who you are or what you've lost. June insisted on driving me to the house not because I wanted to confront it, but because I needed to see the wreckage with my own eyes. We didn't speak much on the way there. She kept glancing at me like I might shatter at any second. But I didn't. I had passed through the phase of heartbreak. Now, I was standing on the edge of something harder, sharper. This wasn't grief. It was resolve. When we turned onto our old street, my breath caught. Not because I missed it, but because it was already unrecognizable. The yard I had spent summers planting and weeding now held a plastic swing set. The rose bushes were gone. The house had been painted a shade of taupe, so bland it made my stomach turn. But the worst part was the sound of children laughing. Someone else had already moved in. A woman opened the front door, a toddler perched on her hip. She looked startled to see two strangers parked outside her fence. I stepped out slowly. "I used to live here," I said gently. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just needed to see it." Her expression softened. She walked toward the fence, the little boy clinging to her side. "You're Evelyn, Thomas's wife." My jaw clenched. "Technically, yes. I'm Sarah. My husband and I bought the house. Thomas told us you were divorcing and needed to sell fast. He said it was mutual." I stared at her, watching the sincerity drain from her face as I shook my head. "I was in Dubai when he sold it," I said quietly. "I found out through a phone call." A hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, I had no idea." The paperwork. It was all filed. The real estate agent said everything had been signed before you left for your trip. My stomach twisted. "Did the agent say who signed it?" "I assumed it was you." The signature was there, notarized and everything. My pulse throbbed in my temples. I nodded, more to myself than to her. "Thank you, Sarah. This isn't your fault." I turned back toward the car. My legs felt heavy. I climbed into the passenger seat, shut the door, and sat in silence as June pulled away. "He forged my signature," I said flatly. June's eyes widened. "That's a felony." "I know, and now we can prove it." Back at her apartment, I called Cassandra. She answered before the first ring even finished. "He forged the deed," I told her. The new owner confirmed everything. She believed I had signed off on it before my trip. The notary stamp was faked, or someone's being paid to lie. Cassandra didn't miss a beat. "We'll get a handwriting expert. I'll file an emergency motion with the court to freeze any further transactions on that property and subpoena the title company and notary records. If he faked your signature on a deed, that's not just unethical, that's prison time." "I'm ready." There was no more uncertainty in my voice, no more hoping for answers or closure. I didn't want peace anymore. I wanted justice. I wanted to dismantle whatever scheme he and Lauren had built, brick by brick, lie by lie. That afternoon, June and I transformed her dining table into what Cassandra would later call our war room. Legal documents, financial records, color-coded files, it looked like a crime board from a detective show. And in the center of it all was a photo of Thomas and Lauren pulled from her public Instagram. Him in a navy suit. Her in a red dress, both smiling like they hadn't just set fire to my life. I stared at that photo for a long time. My phone buzzed. Another unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at Luna at RPM. Thomas. The audacity made me laugh out loud. "He still thinks he's in control," I muttered. "Are you going?" June asked. "I'm not going alone." The next day, I walked into Luna wearing the same gray coat Thomas once said made me look too intimidating. Good. That was the point. Cassandra sat beside me, calm and composed. A digital recorder was hidden in my purse, already rolling. Thomas showed up exactly on time, wearing that smug, clean-cut confidence that used to charm me. Not today. He paused when he saw Cassandra. "I thought this was just us," he said. "It's never going to be just us again," I replied. "Fine," he said, sliding a manila folder across the table. I brought a settlement offer. I opened it. $25,000. In exchange, I would sign away all rights to our joint assets, agree not to pursue legal action, and keep my mouth shut. It took everything in me not to laugh in his face. $25,000, I repeated, for an 8-year marriage, a stolen house, drained accounts, and forged documents. "You didn't contribute anything financially," he said smoothly. "Let's not pretend." I stared at him, stunned. "I worked full-time the entire marriage. I supported you through 3 career changes. I covered our health insurance, paid half the mortgage. You made your little marketing salary. I made the investments." Cassandra leaned forward. "Mr. Grant, are you aware that forging your wife's signature on a deed is a felony?" He blinked. I don't know what you're talking about. She never signed those papers. And she has travel records to prove she wasn't even in the country the day the sale was filed. There's no record of her visiting a notary, but her signature magically appears. Thomas shifted in his seat. His confidence wavered. You're making a mistake, Evelyn, he said, lowering his voice. This can still be easy, but if you push, I'll make things very hard for you. I have friends, connections. I'll make sure people know what kind of woman you really are. There it was. The real Thomas. The man behind the mask. I stared at him, steady. I think you've forgotten who I am, I said softly. You think I'm a problem to be erased, but I'm the one holding the pen now. He didn't reply. He just stood up and walked out, leaving the folder behind. Cassandra reached over and closed it without another glance. Outside, the city buzzed on like always. But for me, something had shifted. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was driving. As we walked back to our office, I thought about everything Thomas had done. The lies, the theft, the betrayal. And I realized he hadn't planned for this version of me. The version who doesn't fall apart. The version who fights back. He didn't just underestimate me. He unleashed me. I didn't expect the moment I saw her to sting the way it did. But there she was, Lauren Bennett, smiling in a photo on Thomas's Instagram. Posted just 6 days after our bank accounts were emptied and the house sold out from under me. She wore my necklace, the one I'd given Thomas for our anniversary. Her perfectly manicured fingers curled around his arm like she had earned the right. I stared at that picture for a long time. She looked smug, pleased, like a woman who thought she had one. Melissa walked in, holding 2 coffees and a stack of printed screenshots. She dropped them onto the war room table with the precision of someone who had been through breakups ugly enough to know that documentation was power. Lauren Bennett, she said, as I sipped the bitter coffee. 29, licensed real estate agent, works for a boutique firm on the North Side, drives a Range Rover, lists yoga and wine tasting as her hobbies. And wait for it, she's married. My head jerked up. What? Melissa slid a marriage certificate across the table. David Bennett works in finance. Travels constantly. According to his social profiles, he's been in Europe on a long-term assignment for the past 10 months. My guess, he has no idea what his wife's been up to. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of it settle. So she's not just the other woman. She's the original wife. And a damn good liar, Melissa said. You think Thomas knows? I shook my head slowly. No. Thomas isn't good at sharing power. He wouldn't tolerate being a side piece. Cassandra arrived not long after, a briefcase in one hand and a glint in her eye. You're not going to like this, she said, flipping open her files, but it's important. She laid out a series of documents, photos, names, transaction histories. At first, it looked like any financial investigation, but then I noticed something. Each property sold under market value, each with minimal improvements, each transaction tied back to a company I'd never heard of, Bennett Grant Holdings. Cassandra tapped the header. Shell Company. Registered 9 months ago in Delaware. Owned jointly by Thomas Grant and Lauren Bennett. I froze. That's my name in that LLC. Patel leaned forward. We've confirmed for international accounts tied to Thomas Grant. 2 of them used your Social Security number to open lines of credit. This goes beyond marital fraud. We're talking about wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit tax evasion, and intentional defrauding of the federal government. Did he think he was untouchable? I asked. He probably still does, Daniel said from beside me. But he's wrong. The FBI laid out their findings in chilling detail. Thomas and Lauren had been running the scheme longer than any of us suspected, almost 2 full years. They started with minor transactions. Flipping low-end homes, underreporting profits, routing payments through dummy contractors. Then, as their confidence grew, so did the scale. They bought 3 properties using money pulled from our joint savings. Thomas used my employment history to forge credibility, and my name on the tax forms to create the illusion of dual income. He'd essentially cast me as an invisible investor, then left me holding the bag. Worse, he applied for 2 personal loans under my name, both close to $50,000, and had begun funneling payments through my credit cards to avoid delinquency notices. The debt was real. The payments were clean. And the entire thing would have remained invisible if I hadn't gone looking. The implications hit me like a gut punch. I was paying off his crimes, I whispered. He was using my trust my credit to make sure he looked legitimate. Agent Patel nodded solemnly. It's what we call domestic financial abuse. And sadly, it's more common than you'd think, especially when one partner controls the money and the other assumes that's just part of the arrangement. He used my own discipline against me, I said. I trusted him to handle our accounts while I focused on my job. I thought that was teamwork. Monroe added, it's not just you. We've attracted at least 8 similar cases in the tri-state area that followed the same structure. Husband takes over finances, uses wife's identity to fund illicit activity, then discards her just before the fallout. Cassandra folded her arms. You re-saying Thomas isn't just a greedy husband as part of something bigger. Patel slid a new folder across the table. We believe there's a network. Not formal, but informally connected. They share tips. Shell company templates. Tricks for transferring titles and bypassing red flags. And we think Thomas is one of the ones teaching others how to do it. I stared at the names inside. Most I didn't recognize, but one made my blood go cold. A man named Raymond Coulter. Years ago, Thomas had done business with him some tech startup that went belly up in 6 months. I remember Thomas laughing about it over wine, saying, Raymond's not the smartest guy, but he knows how to hide $1. Apparently, he'd learned more than that. Agent Patel looked at me carefully. Would you be willing to testify, not just against Thomas, but about the structure? How he kept you in the dark, the signs you missed, the tactics he used? I didn't even hesitate. Absolutely. If it helps someone else get out of this hell, I'll tell every detail. Agent Monroe tapped the flash drive. Then let's make sure he never does this to anyone else. Later that day, as Cassandra and I walked out of the federal building into the brittle March air, something in me shifted. I'd spent weeks drowning in shame for not seeing it sooner, for letting Thomas control the finances, for falling in love with a man who was capable of gutting me without blinking. But now, I didn't feel shame. I felt fury. Cold, focused, weaponized fury. That night, Melissa brought pizza, and June arrived with a bottle of bourbon, and the 3 of us sat on the floor of the apartment with legal pads and laptops. We were going through every open thread names, timelines, money transfers. It felt less like paperwork and more like a battle plan. Then my phone buzzed. Locked number. I answered, placing it on speaker. Evelyn, came Thomas's voice, smooth, casual, like he hadn't dismantled my life and burned the pieces. You shouldn't be calling me, I said calmly. I know, but I heard you've been busy. FBI meetings, lawyers' press. Are you scared? I asked. There was a pause. I think you're blowing things out of proportion. It didn't have to be this messy. You made it messy, I said. You forged my name, drained our accounts, and planned to disappear. I didn't start this, but I'm going to finish it. I'm just saying this could still be resolved quietly. There are ways to make this all go away. Melissa rolled her eyes. June muttered, unbelievable. I responded, steady and clear. You can talk to my lawyer from now on. I'm done listening to liars. Then I hung up. We sat in silence for a beat. He's rattled, Melissa said. Good. He's cornered, June corrected, and desperate. They were both right. But I wasn't afraid anymore. That week, Cassandra filed the civil suit. Fraud, identity theft, emotional distress, intentional infliction of harm, financial sabotage. She requested a full audit of every asset tied to Thomas or Lauren. By then, the IRS had already flagged 3 years of backdated returns and opened their own case, and the FBI. They were just getting started. As I stood before the mirror brushing my hair one night, I looked into my own eyes and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she was broken, because she was becoming something stronger than she'd ever imagined. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about making sure he and men like him could never do it again. The courthouse smelled like old carpet and coffee. Not the kind of place where you imagine justice being served. But here I was, wearing a steel gray suit, my hair pinned back, heels clicking on tile like a metronome marking the slow beat of reckoning. This wasn't the final trial, but it was the beginning. The grand jury hearing, the first real step toward dragging Thomas Grant and Lauren Bennett into the light they had worked so hard to avoid. I sat behind the prosecution's table beside Cassandra, our files arranged in militant precision. The federal prosecutor, a woman named Rachel Kim, nodded at me respectfully. Her sleeves were rolled up. She wasn't here for drama. She was here to win. Thomas entered 5 minutes later, flanked by his new lawyer, Kenneth Walsh, all teeth and expensive tailoring. But Thomas didn't look like the man who once ordered wine with confidence and tapped my thigh at dinner parties to signal silent jokes. He looked smaller. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes darted around the room. When he met mine, I didn't flinch. He blinked first. The hearing began quietly. Formalities, introductions. Then the evidence began to pile, one item at a time. The forged deed, the offshore transfers, the shell companies. Daniel's voice, calm and clinical, laid out the framework like a blueprint for criminal ambition. Each number was a wound. Each signature, a betrayal. When it was my turn, I took the stand and told the story from the top. The call in Dubai, the frozen accounts, the lies. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. My truth was heavy enough. Rachel Kim asked, "When did you first suspect your husband was committing fraud?" "Not until I realized he had erased me," I said. "From our finances, our marriage, our future. He didn't just leave me, he tried to vanish me, make me responsible for the mess." "Did you willingly sign any of the documents associated with the house sale?" "No, and I've been in marketing for 20 years. I know how to read a contract. If I'd signed anything like that, I'd remember." I saw the jury taking notes, watching me. Not with pity but attention. I was more than a victim. I was a woman who had survived the full weight of a lie and still showed up to testify. When I stepped down, Thomas didn't look at me. His lawyer asked for a recess. Cassandra leaned in and whispered, "He's rattled." "Good," I whispered back. "Let him sweat." After the hearing, Rachel walked with us down the corridor. "He's cooked," she said bluntly. "We'll get the indictment." And with the added evidence from the wire transfers last week, we're looking at serious time. "How serious?" I asked. 8 to 12 years minimum. More if he doesn't cooperate. But Thomas wasn't built to cooperate. He was built to deny, manipulate, and deflect skills that didn't work well under cross-examination. 2 days later, we got the call. Grand jury indictment. Fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and obstruction of justice. Cassandra poured a quiet glass of champagne in her office. "This isn't the finish line, but it's the start of his fall." I nodded but didn't drink. "He'll try something. He always does." I didn't have to wait long. That weekend, Kenneth Walsh called Cassandra with a revised offer. Thomas was suddenly open to negotiation. He would return $150,000 from a hidden account, provide a full confession of the forged documents, and agree to a fast-track divorce settlement. I signed a non-disclosure agreement and withdrew my cooperation from the federal investigation. Cassandra barely blinked. Absolutely not. She called me anyway, out of professional duty. Do you want to hear the offer? She asked. No, I said. Because I don't negotiate with people who steal from me and try to erase me. You're sure? I'm sure. Instead, I gave another interview, this time with a national financial magazine doing a feature on domestic financial abuse. They didn't name names, but they told my story. They included a photo of me, not posed, not airbrushed, just me sitting in a chair, holding the file folder that started everything. The headline read, "She wasn't just his wife. She was his cover story." The piece went viral. And that's when Lauren cracked. I got a call from Agent Patel. Jessica Morrison, Lauren's real name, is ready to talk. Wait, Jessica. Patel sighed. Jessica Lauren Morrison. Bennett was her maiden name. She's been using both to dodge paper trails. She's ready to flip. Fully, she's scared. Facing prison time, her husband has cut her off. Her license is gone. She's got nothing left to bargain with except the truth. I met with them the next morning. Lauren Jessica looked like a shell of the woman I'd seen online. Her eyes were red, her skin pale, her mouth trembling every time she opened it. I know you hate me, she said softly, and I don't blame you. I don't hate you, I replied. I just want the truth. She gave it. All of it. Thomas had recruited her. She didn't realize at first how deep it would go. It started with cutting corners, fake invoice here, a skewed commission there. But then he showed her how to create dummy buyers, how to underreport values, how to reroute closing profits into hidden accounts. He made me feel like we were building something, she said. But really, he was just using me the same way he used you. It was strange hearing it from her. There was no sympathy in me. No warmth, but there was clarity. We'd both been manipulated, played. But I had fought back. And she had followed. The information she provided opened doors. Offshore accounts. Backup shell companies. Contacts in Florida and Nevada where Thomas had prepped escape routes. He hadn't just planned to leave me. He had planned to disappear. Completely. But now he couldn't. Because the walls were closing in. The official trial date was set for October. Until then, we prepared. Cassandra reviewed thousands of pages. Daniel worked with forensic analysts. I sat through hours of deposition prep, recording every lie Thomas ever told and matching it to the proof we now held. Some nights, I lay in bed, unable to sleep, wondering if I would ever stop replaying the moment he called from Dubai as casually as if he were canceling dinner plans. But other nights, I felt something else. Fire. Not rage. Not anymore. Conviction. He thought he could end me with a phone call. But I had turned that call into a warrant now. We were winning. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Not with gawkers or the curious public, but with people who mattered. Women in suits with notebooks. Older couples whispering. Reporters scribbling. I could feel the buzz, the kind that hangs in the air before a thunderstorm. But I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. I had already lived through the destruction. This was the part where we laid the bricks of truth, one by one, and watched the walls go up around him. Thomas sat across the aisle at the defendant's table, expression blank, trying for the same effortless charm he'd used in boardrooms and dinner parties. But it didn't land. Not here. Not after the grand jury. Not after the press. Not after Lauren Jessica flipped on him with a folder of emails and audio recordings. Cassandra stood and gave the opening statement. Her voice was measured, her pace slow and certain, like she was telling a story she already knew the ending to. She spoke of trust, of silence used as a weapon, of how a marriage became a business transaction and, then, a crime scene. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she said, My client didn't just lose her marriage. She lost her identity, her savings, her future, and she nearly lost her name. This is not a case of a bitter divorce. This is a case of premeditated financial and emotional theft, and we intend to prove every step of it. The prosecution's evidence rolled in like a tide. Bank statements, emails, false signatures, a timeline of property flips too perfect to be legal. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Accountants, buyers, even the notary who admitted to being pressured into certifying documents without the second party present. Then came Jessica. She walked in slow, wearing black, her hands wrung together as if she were still trying to hold on to the person she used to be. She answered each question with a tremble, but no hesitation. Yes, Thomas knew the accounts were in Evelyn's name. Yes, he coached me on how to redirect profits without raising red flags. Yes, he planned to flee. He had flight reservations under an alias, cash stashed in 3 states, and a burner phone. And then she said something I wasn't prepared for. He told me he had done it before. The courtroom murmured. Even the judge looked up. He said he'd been married once before, and that she had no idea he was using her name, that he left her with debt and got out clean. He said I was smarter, that I could help him make it permanent this time. I felt something shift in my chest, some mix of fury and pity, shame and vindication. He had been practicing this game long before me. I wasn't special. I was just the next move. Cassandra cross-examined flawlessly, threading Jessica's testimony into a wider picture of manipulation. By the time she stepped down, Thomas looked like he was made of stone. The defense tried to claw back some ground. They claimed it was a business misunderstanding, that Evelyn had signed documents voluntarily and misinterpreted what was happening. But every time they tried to point a finger, Cassandra raised a document that pointed it right back. Then came the moment I took the stand for the final time. The courtroom was silent. I looked directly at the jury, letting them see me not the version Thomas painted, but the real woman who had built her career from nothing, who loved with her whole chest, who trusted deeply, and was betrayed precisely because of that. I didn't miss the signs, I said quietly, because there were no signs. There were routines, smiles, dinner plans, a shared calendar, and shared goals. And then one day, the man I loved vanished with my money, my name, and my home man left behind only a void. It wasn't an accident. It was designed that way. I didn't misread him. He misled me. I saw 2 jurors nod. When I stepped down, I felt taller than I had in months. Not because I'd said anything extraordinary, but because I had said it plainly. Honestly, no rage. No revenge. Just the truth. The closing arguments came swiftly. Cassandra laid out the timeline like a prosecutor and a poet. She reminded the jury that trust isn't just an emotion, it's a currency. And Thomas had spent mine like it was nothing. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. They returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts. Fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, conspiracy, obstruction, all of it. Thomas's expression cracked then. For the first time, he looked less like a man and more like a hollowed-out version of one finally realizing that charm could only buy so much time. And the bill had come due. The judge sentenced him to 11 years in federal prison, with no chance of parole for at least 7. Full restitution to be paid to me, including liquidated properties and offshore assets the court had frozen. He was to be remanded immediately. As they took him away in cuffs, he looked at me, maybe hoping for a final stare down. But I didn't give it to him. He didn't deserve the power of my attention. Outside the courthouse, the sky was unusually clear. Cassandra hugged me briefly. Melissa squeezed my hand. June cried openly, the way sisters do when the storm has passed and the damage is finally measurable. We didn't go out to celebrate. We didn't need to. Instead, We went home to my new place, small but warm, with photos already hung and no hidden papers in the drawers. I made tea. Melissa brought donuts. June lit a candle. There was no victory speech, just laughter, relief, a quiet reclaiming of space. And when I finally went to bed that night, I didn't think about what I'd lost. I thought about what I'd rebuilt. Not my old life, something better, something mine, entirely mine. Thank you for staying with me through the end of this story. If you're still here, it means something in this journey resonated with you, and I am truly grateful for your presence. This wasn't just a tale of betrayal and justice. It was a reminder that sometimes the people closest to us can become strangers, and that rebuilding after heartbreak isn't just possible. It's powerful. We are never too old, too tired, or too broken to stand up and reclaim our lives. Trust is sacred, and when it's broken, truth becomes your loudest voice. I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. Let's build a community that believes in truth, healing, and second chances. And if this story moved you, or if you want more real, raw, and deeply human stories like this one, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. That way, you won't miss what comes next. Because life doesn't end when someone tries to erase you. Sometimes, that's when your real story begins.